Okay, we have Jesselyn Radack. She's an attorney and represents Thomas Brake and William Binney. Yeah. Yay, it's about whistleblowing. The state itself claims to be the benevolent incarnation of the will of others. But since you have a monopoly of force, you don't know what's going on, and these three people will tell you what's going on in the heart of darkness. So, warm welcome.
I'll start. Wow. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with you, and I want to thank everyone from 29C3 for inviting me. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay, good. I am a whistleblower, and I know that doesn't translate easily to a lot of languages, but whistleblowing, which entails government employees and private sector employees exposing fraud, waste, abuse, and illegality. Whistleblowing has changed drastically in the digital age. By and far, I think computer technology has helped whistleblowers. It helped me back in 2001. I'm one of those cases Jake referred to this morning. I am a whistleblower. I didn't go to work saying, gee, I want to become a whistleblower today. I was actually the ethics attorney for the Justice Department, which is the nation's highest law enforcement agency in the United States. And on December 7th of 2001, this is a couple months after 9/11, I received a phone call from another attorney in the criminal division, and he wanted to know about the ethical propriety of interrogating the American Taliban without his lawyer. Do you remember what I mean by the American Taliban? No, you were all babies. No, I'm kidding. It's a reflection on my age. But basically, John Walker Lind had gone on a vision quest and found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, hanging out with the wrong people. Of course, back when he went to Pakistan, America was friends with the Taliban. We gave the Taliban money, and even now, after 9/11, they became enemies, but now we're sort of frenemies again with the Taliban. So anyway, John Walker Lind became the first capture in the war on terrorism. He also became the first prisoner in the war on Afghanistan. And he was also the first person tortured by the United States in the war on terrorism. So I had received a call about whether or not the FBI on the ground in Pakistan could question him without his lawyer. In the United States, you can't do that. You have to make people aware of what their rights are. Accordingly, being the ethics attorney for the department, I advised that they had to allow him his attorney. That was on a Friday. Over the weekend, the FBI interrogated him anyway. In addition to that, there were photos circulating around the world of John Walker Lind, and it looked a lot like he was being tortured. So they come back on Monday. The criminal division attorney says, yeah, we basically blew off your advice and questioned him anyway. What do we do now? And I said, not to worry. There are ways we can take care of this. And basically, we can seal off that interview and use it only for national security and intelligence gathering. Just don't use it for criminal prosecution. That was how we dealt with it. Sometimes people make ethical mistakes, and you can still clean up from that. So that was my advice. And then I strangely didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And then in January, Attorney General Ashcroft, meaning the highest lawyer in the country who ran the Justice Department, announced that a criminal complaint was being filed against John Walker Lindh. And he said, the subject here is entitled to choose his own lawyer. And to our knowledge, he has not chosen a lawyer at this time. I knew that was a complete lie. 3 weeks later, Ashcroft announced the formal indictment of John Walker Lindh and said his rights have been carefully, scrupulously guarded. I don't know if that looks like someone whose rights have been carefully, scrupulously guarded. John Walker Lindh was our first glimpse of torture in the United States, and nobody flinched. He was naked, blindfolded, gagged, duct-taped to a board. He had a bullet in his leg, no medical treatment. He was found nearly dead, and this is how we treated an American, which can give you a little insight into how we treat people who have the misfortune of being Arab or Muslim in our country. Because if this can happen to John Walker Lindh, who's a white guy from Marin County, California, then you can only imagine the fate of other people who are Arab or immigrant or poor or don't speak English or happen to be the wrong religion. Anyway, Ashcroft and the Department of Justice continued to lie about the conditions of John Walker Lindh's interrogation, how he was found. And meanwhile, as we see with Julian Assange, top people in Congress and the president pronounced him guilty before ever being tried or ever even being charged. I kept my mouth shut in those beginning weeks. While I knew the Attorney General was lying, it was a prerogative of the leader of the department to say what he wanted. But in terms of how I decided to blow the whistle, there was a pivotal event. As the criminal case continued to proceed, I inadvertently learned that the judge in the case had ordered all Justice Department correspondence related to the interrogation of John Walker Lindh. Such orders routinely go to everybody in the Justice Department. There are 10,000 people in the Department of Justice. I worked directly on the case, and the order was concealed from me. But there was more. I learned about it only because the prosecutor contacted me directly. And I found out there's this order. And then the prosecutor says, I have 2 of your emails. I wanted to make sure that I had everything. I knew there was a problem. I had no idea about this court order. And I knew I had written way more than 2 emails. I went and checked the hard copy file. Back then, we used to print everything on paper and store it, primarily not electronically, but in hard copy. I went to check the file, and my email containing the assessment that the FBI had committed an ethics violation in its interrogation of John Walker Lindh, and parenthetically, in the torture of John Walker Lindh, those emails were missing. My heart sank. I literally felt sick. They were seeking death penalty for this person, and the relevant evidence had not made it to the court. Evidence that would have bearing on whether or not his confession would be admissible against him, a confession that was tortured out of him. With the help of computer experts like you, we had just gotten the internet at the department, so this is back in the dark ages of computer help at the US government. But with the help of computer experts like you, I was able to recover the missing emails from my computer archives. So that was another important lesson that General Petraeus should have learned, that email doesn't disappear, even if you delete it. It's still there. You can delete it, you can trash it, you can empty your trash, but it's still there. I'm sure you guys are sophisticated enough to know how to actually get rid of it, but surely the people at the department were not that schooled in their evidence destruction techniques. So anyway, I was able to recover all these missing emails. It said some pretty damning things. I documented the emails in a memo to my boss, and I made copies of the emails to take home with me in case they disappeared again, which I was worried about. And then I resigned. Months later, the department continued to claim that it never believed at the time of his interrogation that John Walker Lindh had a lawyer. I was no longer working there, but I knew the truth, and I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't live with the idea that someone's life might be taken because I sat on evidence that I knew I had created. I gave the emails to Newsweek magazine in accordance with a law we have called the Whistleblower Protection Act, which I later found doesn't protect you at all. The Lindh case promptly fell apart. He ended up pleading guilty to 2 very minor charges. Unfortunately, he got a stiff 20-year sentence, so he is still in jail. I think he's done with the first 10 years, but he'll get out when he's about my age now, and at least he'll have a life in front of him. But still, it's a very heavy-handed sentence for someone who didn't really do anything and never raised arms against the United States. After the case was over, I thought my nightmare was ended. I thought, thank God, it's over with. But little did I know, in blowing the whistle, in making those emails public, those emails that had been destroyed public, that I unleashed the full force of the entire executive branch of the United States government. As a result of what I did, I was forced out of my new job at a private law firm at the government's urging. I was fired from another job, again, at the government telling my employer that I was a criminal. I was placed under criminal investigation, though I was never told what for, and no charges were ever brought against me. I was referred to the state bar, which in the United States licenses attorneys. I was referred based on a secret report that I didn't have access to, making it very hard, if not impossible, to fight the secret charges. If it sounds like something out of a Kafka novel, you're right. The icing on the cake was being put on the no-fly list. It's a terrorist watch list that prohibits you from boarding a plane without undergoing secondary security screening. So I missed a lot of flights because of that, and it was also humiliating to have to undergo full-screen body searches every single time I flew. I had also recently had a baby, so the icing on the cake was being asked to drink my own breast milk. After years of professional exile. I call them euphemistically my time in the wilderness. But after going through this, I decided to dedicate my life to representing other whistleblowers. As horrible, thank you. As horrible as my ordeal was, it taught me important lessons that I've been able to bring to bear in helping other people who have bravely blown the whistle. People like Tom Drake, who were facing something far worse than I ever could have imagined. Like me, Tom Drake was a target of a federal criminal leak investigation. To make matters worse, he was charged under the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act is a little-known World War I law meant to go after spies, not whistleblowers. His case was the beginning of a very disturbing trend in the United States, trying to turn whistleblowers and truth-tellers into criminals. The Obama administration, and I campaigned for, I contributed to, and I voted for Obama before anyone accuses me of being anti-Obama, but the Obama administration has brought more prosecutions against whistleblowers than any previous president, and than all previous presidents of the United States combined. You know who else is being criminally investigated under the Espionage Act? Anyone? Under seal. Julian Assange is being investigated under the Espionage Act. And then I heard someone say the other name, Bradley Manning, who is actually being prosecuted under the military version of the Espionage Act. I just attended Bradley Manning's torture hearing in the United States. And based on that alone and what was done to him, the case should be dismissed, though I doubt that it will be. I feel that overall technology ends up helping whistleblowers. I mean, it certainly helped me get the emails that were the proof that the department, which was prosecuting Enron for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice, the emails proved that they were doing the exact same thing on their own. They were committing criminal acts. Tom, who we'll talk to you in a minute, was exonerated in large part because of what his computer files did and did not show. It turned out that, contrary to the government's assertions, he never possessed classified information. He actually had unclassified information that the government later stamped classified improperly. Now, sometimes technology, as Jake talked about this morning, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. The technology that our government has abused includes, for example, using it to retaliate against whistleblowers. Some scientists in the Food and Drug Administration, recently, the government used spyware and other invasive surveillance techniques against the scientists who were blowing the whistle, and it surveyed the scientists, it surveyed reporters, and it even surveyed members of Congress in order to target 7 whistleblower scientists. That obviously to me and to you, is an unethical abuse of technology. But by and large, computers and technology have changed the face of whistleblowing for good. Exhibit number 1 is WikiLeaks. On my way here, I met with Julian Assange. He solidified my belief as a whistleblower myself and as a lawyer for whistleblowers that WikiLeaks is one of the only safe ways in the world to get large amounts of information out to the public anonymously on a mass scale. The government realizes this and is therefore very threatened by WikiLeaks. Instead of launching a worldwide manhunt for Osama bin Laden, they launched a worldwide manhunt for Julian Assange, a blogger, someone who has a website. They tried to shut down WikiLeaks by choking off funding, an effort that's recently been thwarted by a number of creative people coming up with freedom of the press. You can go to freedomofpress.org, and contribute anonymously to WikiLeaks and a number of other open government channels. And they've tried to force Julian Assange to remain in the Ecuadorian embassy, even though he's been granted asylum. Now, I'm not going to get into asylum law, but as a human rights attorney, I can tell you that the granting of asylum is because you have a valid fear of political persecution, and the government to which you may be turned over is unable or unwilling to stop it. That's the international standard. Assange meets that standard. We don't need to jettison ethics, human rights, and the rule of law to achieve security. The notion that we have to make a choice between civil liberties and national security is a false dichotomy that has driven much of the war on terrorism. The war on terrorism should not be a war on ethics, integrity, technology, and the rule of law. Stopping terrorism should not include, thank you. Stopping terrorism should not include terrorizing whistleblowers and truth tellers who raise concern when the government cuts corners to electronically surveil, torture, and assassinate its own people. And it is not okay for a president to grant himself the power to play prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner of anyone on the entire fucking planet. The war on whistleblowers is a toxic trend, and I hope our stories will help deprive it of oxygen. In responding to terrorism, we must not trample on the very freedoms for which we are supposedly fighting. I offer my thanks to all of you, my computer chaos compatriots, and to all the bloggers and hacktivists who prove every day that going digital is one of the weapons against despotism, who know that there is a difference between privacy and patriotism, and who know that technology prevents tyranny. It is my honor and privilege to introduce my clients, Thomas Drake and Bill Binney, who are the best evidence that employees should never have to choose their conscience over their careers, and especially their very freedom. Thank you.
Guten Abend. Ich spreche wenig Deutsch. I have a number of things to share with you this evening, and it's going to be quite sobering as I relate to the story of what happened to me as I was placed in the hands of the surveillance state. But it's important for you to know right up front. I will say this in German. Ich möchte nicht in einem Land wie DDR leben. Let me take you back a few years. My first computer. It's where I learned to program. As I was introduced to the fascinating world during what I call the golden era of computing, the 8-bit age. 6502C processor, had all of 48K of RAM, and a 10K operating system. I still have this computer. And interestingly enough, this computer was purchased by me when I was stationed in England at RAF Mildenhall, flying on RC-135s during the Cold War. And it was during the time that I was in England, I was a member of a computer club, I ran the Atari section, that I was also introduced to the earlier phases of the Chaos Computer Club and demo parties, things being passed around by SneakerNet and through BBSs, acoustic modems waiting for that special signal so you could connect, 300 baud no less. I also did a lot in this space. Now this is the inside of the Atari 800. There used to be a day I could actually modify these boards, put a electrically erasable PROM inside the 810 5¼ floppy disk and give it page 6 expansion memory. It was the days, and in some ways it was quite innocent. However, what was my day job, or sometimes my night job? It was this airplane. Incredible technology for its day. Phenomenal. It was during this period that I was an aircrew member. I was a cryptolinguist. The country I specialized in was East Germany. I never imagined, ever imagined, that I'd find myself some 30, not even 30 years later, 26 years to be exact, find myself seeing the rise of the surveillance state on an extraordinarily vast scale within the United States of America. I also flew on this plane, and so when I served on these aircraft, we did monitor the electronic communications from Warsaw Pact countries, including the Soviet Union. We flew many different routes. And what I became aware of was the extraordinary secrecy and surveillance that was employed in East Germany by the Stasi secret police. And they become monstrously efficient. They knew almost everything about the population. To know everything was their motto. I repeat, to know everything. Everything was suspect. And today, in the post-Cold War era, I do find myself asking myself and others, how can an open and vibrant democracy exist next to a secret security state? Something has to give. As I found after 9/11, what gave were their precious freedoms and liberties. They're granted to the people, but given up for the sake of security. Secrecy is for losers. This is a quote from Daniel Moynihan, former senator, passed away some years ago. Note the quote, "The compulsory withholding of information," this is what defines secrecy, "reinforced by the prospect of sanctions for disclosure." One could call it pre-crime profiling, but again, the basis, the foundation for the state needing to know everything. I have heard this, especially since my case investigation, the prosecution, indictment, and facing 35 years in prison went so public. I've done nothing wrong, I have nothing to hide. In a secret surveillance state, you don't get to define what's wrong or hidden. It's the government that does, in secret. But this is classic Orwellian doublespeak, because in the land of the shadows, a land that I operated in for a number of years, only the mirage of a mirror is sometimes a prop, or maybe even an agitprop. The configuration of this flag has a particular meaning for those in the United States, and there's no doubt some of you in the audience who understand when you see the flag of the United States flying upside down, what does that mean? It means you're in distress. The United States is under distress because what's giving is its constitutional form of government. So what happens when you trade liberty for security? As if that's the choice. As Jesselyn said, it's a false dichotomy. (1787), when that grand experiment was launched, went out to the states, the original 13 colonies, for ratification. A woman reportedly asked Benjamin Franklin, "What did you guys do in there? What did you create?" And he purportedly said, "A republic, if you can keep it." So, in the infamous words of Benjamin Franklin, a democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. And liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. So what expired on 9/11? A lot of questions were raised, particularly with the concerns of the government's response. But notice what he also says in the next quote: "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety, deserve neither liberty nor safety." And in the context of this Congress, is data free or the precursor for taking away freedom? It does work both ways. So in a surveillance state, everybody is suspicious. I repeat, in a surveillance state, everybody is suspicious. There is no assumption of innocence. There's actually an assumption that you may be up to no good. And if you're employing techniques involving privacy on internet, that's a red flag. And yet, another quote from a Judge Damon Keith: "Democracies die behind closed doors." This is in a ruling he declared back in August of 2002, when the Bush administration acted unlawfully in holding deportation hearings in secret. He further went on to say the following: "When government begins closing doors, it selectively controls information rightfully belonging to the people. Selective information is misinformation." But as I found out in my case, it didn't matter what the truth was to the government. They're going to make up what was the truth for their own ends. And so I became a traitor in the eyes of the United States government. And I was charged under the Espionage Act. I stand before you tonight as a free man. But But I can't even begin to tell you, given the egregious ordeal that I went through for the past number of years, what freedom really means. When you're facing the prospect, as I did early on, before I was officially indicted, when the chief prosecutor at the time, in 2008, said, "Mr. Drake, how would you like to spend the rest of your natural life in prison?" Maybe you better start cooperating. Being charged with espionage is actually one of the most egregious things you can be charged with as an American. So what are we looking at? A dystopian future? I'm a canary in the coal mine, as I am with Jesselyn and Bill Binney and other colleagues, and any number of others who you will not see in the news. They wanted to put me in prison for telling the truth as a whistleblower. But what was I telling the truth on? Yes, I was telling truth to power, but I was exposing government wrongdoing and illegalities. And the government then decided to find out everything they could find out about me and turn me into an enemy of the state. So you blow the whistle on secret power, you expose high crimes and misdemeanors as defined under the Constitution of the United States of America. That's now defined as a criminal act. And yet, it was a truth that kept me free. And one of those people that kept me free gave me the voice I did not have, defended me in the court of public opinion, was Jesselyn Radack. Let me go back a little bit, and you're going to get what I call the internet version of my story. Internet time is 4 times regular time, because I see a 15-minute warning in front of me. But this is on purpose, because I want you to get a sense of what it's like to live under the thumb and boot of the surveillance state. What did 9/11 open up? Subversion of the Constitution. Privacy and all data became fair game. Truth was the first casualty in the undeclared war. Propaganda became the pretense of the powerful. And one of my favorite quotes from George Orwell, truth is treason in the empire of lies. So here's the dark side of truth. I was data framed. Remember this character? Recognize this place? No such agency, never say anything. No secrets anymore, except the ones we keep. So, dark side of personal data. Imagine for the moment, my first day on the job is 9/11. I'm reporting to the number 3 person at the National Security Agency, in charge of the single largest element of NSA, called the Signals Intelligence Directorate. Little did I know what 9/11 would unleash. And so, in a few short days after 9/11, I had people coming to me in private, extremely concerned, saying, Tom, why are they taking equipment that we normally use to monitor foreign nations, and we're now redirecting it against our own people? We're placing it on internal domestic networks. I thought there were rules against that. I thought the first commandment, the prime directive of NSA, particularly out of all of the problems in the surveillance and the violation of law during the 50s, 60s, and 70s coming to a height in the Nixon administration, we had rules against that. We're not supposed to violate those rules. We're not supposed to spy on Americans. Well, it became clear, because of an effort that I was involved with, that I can't go into detail here. There are some secrets I still need to keep. However, because I was taken off that effort, which was a lawful effort involving current law, involving surveillance in the United States of America and elsewhere against U.S. persons, alarm bells began to rise in my mind. As I found out from others, clearly something was happening. And then I had a very interesting conversation with one of the lead attorneys at the National Security Agency. when I pressed him hard because I recognized at that point in time, in the very first week in October, that NSA was an abject violation of the Constitution and was violating the Fourth Amendment. The amendment that guarantees the right to privacy, the right to be left alone. And if the government wants to violate that, they have to go to a court with an affidavit of probable cause, and then they have to get the judge to accept it, and the judge has to sign a warrant, and that warrant has to be served on you. They were just bypassing that entire mechanism. And he told me in that conversation that NSA was the executive agent for the secret surveillance program approved by the White House. And as soon as he said approved by the White House, I remember what Richard Nixon said. If the president says it's okay, it's legal. And that's precisely what had happened. And so, the next few months, as I discovered even more about this program, I ended up becoming a whistleblower and a material witness for 2 congressional 9/11 investigations in which I reported everything I knew in early 2002 about this secret surveillance program and massive fraud, waste, and abuse and illegalities conducted by NSA. Of course, as a quick side note, after Bill Binney and his colleagues seeing the subversion of our own Constitution retired in October 2001, I became the executive program for an incredible, innovative legal program called Thin Thread. And we discovered, when we actually used it to go against the largest database, NSA, that there was things in that database that could have stopped 9/11. But they didn't share it, didn't know it, hadn't discovered it. Of course, that effort got shut down too. Then Congress, in early 2002, passed legislation that was signed by President Bush directing NSA to deploy Thin Thread to the most critical intelligence sites that NSA had, and they defied congressional orders. That all took place within the first few months after 2001. Accelerate forward, December 2005. First public inkling, blockbuster article written in the New York Times, Eric Lichtblau, James Risen, revealing for the first time publicly the existence of the so-called warrantless wiretapping program and what the government labeled as a terrorist surveillance program. It's fair to say that all hell broke loose within the government. And 2 weeks later, they launched a massive criminal leak investigation. In the summer of 2006, Bill Binney, as well as other colleagues of mine, were raided by the FBI. 4 months later, as I was getting ready to go to work, I'm looking out my bedroom window, a dozen FBI agents streaming across the front yard. There's a very loud knock on the door, and my heart is in my throat. The nightmare had begun. For 2.5 years, the government did everything they could to get me to plead out, put extraordinary pressure on me, family, colleagues, and associates. Took 2.5 years before they actually decided to indict me. 10 felony counts, 5 under the Espionage Act, 1 for obstruction of justice, 4 for making false statements, which in themselves were false statements. But there is a bottom line. Yes, I stand here as a free man, so obviously I didn't end up in prison. I paid no fine. But the cost was extraordinarily high. But the cost to the United States was even higher. Sold out national security to big business, violated the Constitution, the very best of American ingenuity and the Constitution were quite sufficient to protect and defend the country with the best we had under the law. There was no, I repeat, no need to go to the dark side, as former Vice President Cheney said 5 days after 9/11. So let me leave you with some thoughts. Data absent context is data with no meaning. I can't even begin to tell you how much they took data that they found at my house and on my computers and in my accounts out of context. Ironically enough, the vast bulk of what they found was unclassified information that was used to support the 9/11 congressional investigations and a subsequent Department of Defense Inspector General audit investigation at NSA. Lose context, make up the meaning. It's incredibly seductive to manage and manipulate data and for other ends. So what do you do with your data? How do you frame your data? More challenges regarding information sharing. Knowledge is control for some, particularly in the surveillance state. You can control the data. In controlling the data, you avoid potential competition and loss of power. What I know data that you don't know data. Coin of the realm. After 9/11, as I confronted my own senior executives in the leadership of NSA, they said, Tom, you don't understand. We live in exigent conditions that requires exigent means to deal with the threat. So be it if we collect all the data on Americans. Hey, if you've done nothing wrong, it won't matter. Really? So there's a dark side. There is the multi-billion-dollar military-industrial complex. I cannot begin to tell you the number of multimillionaires and millionaires that were made at NSA as a result of 9/11. In fact, one senior executive said that 9/11 was a gift to NSA. Either way, same result. Either way. Critical breakdown in IT and security, incalculable loss of intelligence, and the great historical tragedy, what could have been. But remember, the history of liberty is also the history of government power. So what about the future of internet? What about losing privacy? Privacy is who we are as people. It's who we are with and for each other. And yet we have this rise of the national security state. You ever wonder, as mentioned earlier, Section 215 of the Patriot Act? How about Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act? Basically given the NSA and the government a back door to all information on U.S. persons under a general warrant, which is actually forbidden, by the way, in our Constitution. You never have general warrants. Writs of assistance, anybody knows U.S. history, that was the thing why we revolted against the king. So we need to free the future one bit at a time. What global commons do we want to keep? What do we do? Consider this. The power to collect and analyze data, especially on people, is seductively powerful, especially when done without the person's permission, and particularly when done in secret. It is the ultimate form of control. But here's the real problem. Centralized government in this space, no matter what its policies. So what internet do you want to keep? What technology can we use to ensure our privacy? Given my own experience and others, George Orwell's 1984 is quite real and now already screaming irrelevant, particularly in the virtual space. Remember, it's only the government can create a police state. It's technology that makes that happen, that enables it. As I did for many years, how many want to live inside a virtual public prison surrounded by a digital fence that's controlled by the government? It's one of the vulnerabilities of internet. I've had significant, detailed, deep technical conversations with people in this space about the vulnerability of internet. So points to ponder. With the cloud and all the other data out there, the more the data, the more it enables the Leviathan state when placed in the wrong hands. So what tale do you want to tell to future generations? Remember this, with the surveillance state, There is no compromise with respect to the political imperative of controlling the internet. Protection of personal privacy and anonymity masking becomes a red flag threat. Personal online security through obscurity. We need to enable getting lost in the data. We need more tourists. We need more Asher Wolfs in the world. Moving spirit guide and agitator behind the crypto party phenomenon for the rest of the people. Personal privacy and communications deserve anonymized encryption. We need VPN. We need non-logging servers. That's crucial. Anonymized proxies, and we need more people using privacy-protecting packages that are easier to use. There's the challenge. It's been a very difficult 6 years for me, and I just want to tell you that they've been the most challenging in my life. But I refuse to remain silent in the face of a surveillance state that did everything it could to shut me up. Auf Deutsch, was befürchte ich für die Zukunft? What do I fear for the future? Besides fearing for the future of the United States as constitutional republic, I do fear the creation of a universal wiretap record of a person's life. The ability to have vast access to databases and on the fly be able to profile anybody at any time, anywhere. George Orwell's 1984, the permanent saving and retention of all electronic transactions through a secret, overarching, all-knowing surveillance regime. Surveillance of citizens through GPS positioning and tracking, the fact that every single cell phone, with rare exception, is a tracking device. This is the kind of dystopia. It's persistent, it's growing. I refer to it as a panopticon, and it raises the prospect of a truly draconian digital surveillance fence all around us and makes us all virtual captives of the state. And so I leave you with this thought, given where I started. I can only imagine how the Stasi would simply drool if the Deutsche Demokratische Republik had had the technical equipment of the NSA today. Bill Binney.
Well, good evening. I'd like to thank the 29C3 committee, selecting committee, for selecting me to come here, because I always find it a very hospitable reception among hackers. So what I'd like to do, I only have half an hour here, but what I'd like to do is give you an idea of some of the experience that I had with the Department of Justice, conflict of terms there, but and also the NSA and the FBI especially. And I'd like to go through that and also then get into the technology. I can get into this technology because we had, before we left NSA, we had to go to the intellectual capital lawyers and the property rights lawyers and all the legal people in NSA and talk to them about conflicts of interest and things like that. We didn't want to get involved in a conflict of interest. They said, okay, well, anything that you walk out the door with in your head is your intellectual capital. And yes, you can make a commercial product out of any of that knowledge that you have. So, since I was designing a system that's monitoring the world, I decided to do a commercial product. Okay, so I now have a commercial product that they put me out of business for. And they blackballed us for doing any business with anyone, since we're all under this cloud of being, criminals in their minds, anyway. So I have that technology. It's on file, basically, with the Library of Congress. We have a copyright on it, so it's open to anybody. For $45, you can get a copy, or you can go to the people here at the conference. I gave them copies. You can get copies from them. So it lays out in architectural framework the entire process of how to automate an analysis business process across the entire process, whatever you're looking at, whatever kind of data you're doing, because this applies to everything: stock market exchange, money exchange, travel, phone calls, emails, Twitter, cloud, Facebook, whatever. So the point is that this is the kind of this whole process will give you an idea of what's really going on and the scale of what's happening. So, but first let me go through some of my experiences. I mean, I was at NSA, I was the technical director of the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Group, which meant all the technical aspects of everything in the world was something I was supposed to work on if we had a problem, okay? So I was the kind of guy that we were supposed to go around and create new ways of looking at things and solving problems and generally stir up stuff and change the culture and everything, So become an irritant to everybody because I was changing their ways, and change is something that everybody resists, okay? So, so as a part of that, in the mid-'90s, I also had I was the co-founder of a SIGINT Automation Research Center. It was a small group of people, about 16 total. And we were working 4 or 5 projects at a time, so I had to divide those 16 people among all those projects. So, but we had mixed skills, and that was the beauty of it, because we had computer programmers, engineers, and we had access to physicists. We didn't have one normally, but we could get them if we needed it and had a physics problem. We had cryptanalysts, we had crypto mathematicians, and traffic analysts, systems and data analysts, and language analysis. So we had all the skills together. My other partner that was co-founder was from the research division. So he brought all the skills that were in the technologies, and I brought all the stuff out of operations. So we had them all there, and we would all work together at developing how to solve a problem, whatever that problem was. In this case, it was the internet and mass communications that was populating the world starting in the early 90s. So that was our major thrust and our focus. We actually solved that problem, and of course our commercial product here will show you how that worked. And we did it with a little over $3 million. Now, Tom mentioned the program ThinThread. That cost us about $3,200,000 to do. And what we came into conflict with, and the reason it was rejected by the agency and thrown away, was because we were in conflict with a $4+ billion program called Trailblazer that would start from scratch and that was going to be spending a lot of money with a lot of contractors, so there was a lot of vested interest to get rid of us, okay, which is exactly what they did. So they got rid of everything except the back part, because they didn't have the back processing that we had was the only process they had that would handle large, massive volumes of data. Okay, so that they used, okay, and I was sick of the corruption, so I decided to retire in about June of 2001. So I told the deputy director and the SID director that I was going to retire. It was my intention to get the hell out of there. I didn't tell them why, because it was all the corruption and stuff that they were involved with, the money exchange with contractors, hiring contractors in to manage programs that would send contracts back to the contract organizations they came from. It was like an incestuous relationship, So literally, it was, I need somebody to manage, so let me hire this executive vice president over at the SAIC or something to come in and manage all these transformation programs, billions of dollars worth of programs. And of course, hundreds of millions of program dollars went off to the place where they came from. So, they were earning their money, but not for the people. So I referred to that as a conscious decision of the government of the United States to trade the security of the people of the United States and also of the free world, by the way. You were involved in this because we came across anything, you were protected also. So they traded your security as well as ours for money. That was what they did. And they still don't have the solutions that we were working on 12 years ago. That's why their big data initiative is coming out, and they're asking for automated algorithms to figure out what we were working on 12 years ago. But because they destroyed the SARC, right, and our whole process, they threw the whole process away, except for that back end part. They made themselves incapable of readdressing those same issues. They had to relearn and redo everything, but they didn't have the skill mix to make it work. In other words, they didn't have the people who would work together to make that happen. So they killed that entire structure to make that work. So as a part of that, when they started taking in the telecommunications data, which the telecoms eventually had to get retroactive immunity from George W. I referred to George W. as the replacement for George III, which was King of England when it had a revolution. So we got rid of him and ended up with George W. So, so that meant they were taking in all the data about everybody that the telecommunications had record of. In other words, the billing data. That was how you could build communities and reconstruct all of the people you were working with, your social network and everything, and how you were reacting or acting with this community that you had. So that was the whole objective of that particular process. So when I found out about that, I said, gee, I was at one time considering sticking around to try to help solve the terrorist problem. Because the sites that were picked to originally deploy and ordered by Congress were the sites I picked, which were the terrorist target sites. I went to the terrorist group and said, give me all the sites that you had, because it was under me, so it was the world. So I went and I said, give me all the sites that produce any information that's valuable to you in analyzing terrorist targets. So they gave me a list. So I said, okay, this is the target list, right? It was, pretty simple. And so I put that up as the list. And it was going to cost $9.5 million to do those sites. $9.5 million. And they didn't do it. Because if they did, that would declare the problem was solved, and they wouldn't need the $4+ billion that they said they needed to solve the problem that was already solved. So they didn't do that, but I'll get into some of that technology here. So after that, when I found out, because the contractors they had to use were my contractors, they had to use them to set up the code. They were the only ones that knew the code and how to set it up and make it work. So they had to use them to set it up. So when they did that and started taking data in, they came to me and said, you realize what they're doing? They're doing this, I wasn't supposed to know about the program. It's called Stellar Wind. All right, that was their program to spy on everybody. So they came to me and told me that, and I said, well, immediately, I knew all the people. I know Alexander, I know Hayden, I know Clapper, I know all these, McConnell, I know them all, right? So, and I knew it was pointless to do anything inside the agency. It was an absolute lost cause. So I went directly to the House Intelligence Committee, they are responsible under the FISA laws and the Intelligence Acts of 47 and 78 to monitor the intelligence community and any spying they were doing on U.S. citizens. That was that was a fallout of the Church Committee hearings. So I went there because it was their responsibility to do that monitoring, and I knew the chief staff officer who was in charge of the monitoring NSA. So I went in and said, hey, here's the program that they're doing all this. I didn't know the name of it at the time, but she went to talk to Hayden, and she talked to Portergoss, who was the chairman of that committee. And the point was they all bought into it. She also talked to Nancy Pelosi. Well, Nancy was the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee at the time. And if you looked at Cheney's interview in reviewing in the 10th anniversary of 9/11, he talked about how the program was formed, terrorist surveillance. He said you have to thank the guys at NSA, Hayden's guys at NSA. I never got the thank you note, so. But the point was, they are now in violation of any number of laws, the Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Act, the Intelligence Act of 47. They called it a covert program and limited it to knowledge of 4 people in Congress. That was the the chairman and ranking members of the House and Senate and Intelligence Committees. Now, those people don't monitor anything. There's a staff that does that, okay? And if they call it a covert program, they could limit knowledge of it. They're supposed to tell the Gang of Eight, which is the majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate in addition, but they didn't do that. But that's why Nancy Pelosi said that impeaching George W. Bush is off the table. She was co-opted into the program as they developed it, and she signed up to it. So, also the CIA programs. So if she was going to authorize the impeachment of George Bush, she'd be impeaching herself too, and that was the leverage that George had on her. It's like they were creating a super steroid J. Edgar Hoover, because they would have leverage on everybody in the country by doing this. So no one was safe, okay. So that's why I went directly to the committee. I just wrote off all NSA management and the entire administration. They were all culpable in this. The talk with or the attempts to talk to the House Intelligence Committee, Goss and Pelosi, failed. I mean, they were going to do nothing. All they did was say, you need to talk to Hayden. So they sent the staffer out to talk to Hayden, and he just basically said, you better keep quiet because it's highly classified. You know, never mind, it's against our Constitution, all the laws we had, right? So she came back and said that. So I tried to. I had we're working on a subcontract for another agency, not the NSA, and the guy we were setting it up with went to high school with the daughter of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Rehnquist. So it's really his job to oversee all of this violation of the Constitution. I mean, he's supposed to be the staff holder of that responsibility. So we wrote a note to give to him, to give to Rehnquist's daughter, to pass to Rehnquist, so we could get a meeting with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Because if we went through the regular channels, you know, they'd all filtered out. So we tried to set up a backdoor approach to do that so we could inform them of all the violations of the Constitution. They scrapped the Fourth Amendment, they scrapped the Fifth Amendment, all that's used against everybody. So after that, that failed, and I figured that failed because he probably had an inkling of what was going on and wanted plausible deniability. So if we informed him of that, he couldn't deny that he knew about it. Right? It was just like the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, or the Judiciary Committees, when they were reviewing retroactive immunity for all the telecoms. The reason they were claiming they didn't know what was going on. Well, the telecoms only have two things to offer. One is the billing data about their customers, and the other is access to the wires they run, both of which were being violated. Mark Klein, laid that out in San Francisco with all the NARIS devices on the fiber optic lines running inside the United States. And I knew that the one company I knew that was producing data was AT&T, and they were providing on the order of 320 million records a day of U.S. citizens talking to other U.S. citizens. So you can imagine you can quickly build the communities on virtually everybody in the country. Now, you can imagine this extended to everybody in the world also, because there was no limit on the capabilities that we put together. So after that, Gonzales, we tried to do work with other committee members and House and Senate members to see if we couldn't influence them that way, but that didn't work. So we ended up going to the Department of Justice Inspector General's office. This was after Obama came into office. We had hoped that he might do something different, and of course he didn't. Okay, we took him through the entire Stellar Wind program and what it was doing, and all the participants that we knew about at the time, and how much data was involved, and the violations that they were performing. So we failed to impress him to do anything either. Okay. Because they published a joint IG report on surveillance in mid-2009 that basically said, well, you need to monitor it more closely and have more observation of the system. But so that did absolutely nothing. So our entire government was failing internally. They wouldn't face their own problem. You know, they were violating laws and the Constitution. They wouldn't face up to it and correct their actions. We were working internally to try to make that happen. It just didn't work at all. So, so then after Gonzalez was testifying in the Judiciary Committee, in the Senate Judiciary Committee about all the surveillance programs in June or July of 2007, and 2 days after that, they raided everybody. We also complained, by the way, to the DODIG. We filed a complaint that got us all into trouble, and that's the reason we got raided, because we said, here's all the corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse at NSA, and that's by regulation what we were supposed to do. You know, government policy was to report that, and they gave you the phone numbers to call in, so we did, you know. That was a big mistake. Don't tell the government where they're wasting money or where there's crimes or fraud. So they sent the FBI to us, and to make a story short on the FBI raid, they came pushing through the door. My son opened the door to them. There were like 12 of them, and they came in with their guns drawn, and they pushed him out of the way at gunpoint, came upstairs. I was in the shower. My wife was putting her clothes on. They came into the bedroom, was pointing guns at my wife, and they came into the shower and pointed a gun at me and said, drew me out of the shower. So I had been cooperating with these people for 3 months before that, telling them everything I knew, because I signed an affidavit that I never talked to anybody in the news. So I thought they would understand that that I didn't do that. But that wasn't the point of the raid. The point was to keep me quiet. Well, at the same time, you see, when they were on the back, they tried to get me to implicate somebody in a crime. They said, tell me something that will implicate somebody in crime. They were actually after Tom Drake. And also Diane Rourke, who was the House Intelligence Oversight Committee member that oversaw the NSA account. That was their grudges, so they hold grudges. So when he put it that way, tell me something that would implicate somebody in a crime, I only knew of one crime. So I said, okay, George Bush, Dick Cheney, Tenet and Hayden violated the Constitution, any number of laws, and here's how they did it. The program's called Stellar Wind. They're taking data in on everybody in the country, and they're mapping it out, all our communities, and they're monitoring as it comes in, and millions of records every day. Now, I should say, there was only one agent on the back porch when I was doing this on the back porch. There was only one agent that was cleared for that program. He was the guy who signed the warrant, okay? And all he could do when I was saying all this and explaining this program, the violations of all the rights and laws and stuff, was look at the floor. He couldn't look up because he knew he was participating in covering up all the crimes they were committing. He was trying to keep me quiet. They put the guns on us, and my family too, because they wanted us to stay quiet. Well, you know, that was a red flag to me. I mean, that was the first thing. And then they started fabricating charges against us, and every time I found exculpatory data that they had, but I also had, so I was backed up, you know. So they took my computer and everything, but they didn't get any data. I mean, I also had all that. But so I had that. So I called Tom, and this is the funny part, because I knew Tom's phone was tapped. I didn't know about mine. I wasn't sure about that, but I knew his was. So I called Tom, and I said, Tom, you know, this latest indictment, our lawyers told them they were going to indict us. So the latest indictment they had was going to address us in a conspiracy, and here's the data they had that they were going to charge us with a conspiracy. So I went down the line of all the exculpatory data I had, and I said, Tom, this is evidence of malicious prosecution. Tell your lawyer about this so you can bring it up in court. Well, we never heard about it again. Okay, that was the end of that. That charge went away. So... But I mean, it shows you the shallow, fake character of these people. When they're framing people, like the material they were trying to frame Tom with was marked unclassified. Well, they drew a pencil line through the unclassified and stamped it top secret and said, they charged him, in a review, they charged him with having unclassified material that they reclassified so they could charge him with having classified material. Well, Jim Bamford did a FOIA on that to NSA, and you know they don't know what they're doing at the FOIA office because it's such a big place, left hand doesn't know what the right does. So they gave him some copies of the stuff. He asked for it, and they gave it to him unclassified. So he took it into Judge Bennett and said, you know, hey, look at this. They're charging him with these as classified, and they're giving it to me in a FOIA request, unclassified. So he said, as a friend of the court, he gave it to Judge Bennett, and then Judge Bennett said, gee, this really says they're fabricating everything, so they're actually, that was a felony. They're framing him. That's a felony. They should have been charged with a felony, at any rate. So that was the icing on the cake. Then I said, I have to go public with all this, and I need to have my name on it so that I'm not hiding. I'm no secret informer. I'm out there saying, because nobody's challenging me, by the way, because I know too much, okay? At any rate, I need to get into technology. I have a short period of time here left, so let me do that so you have an idea what the technology is all about. What this was a design we had for input from any source, like take several hundred or several thousand Narrow Insight devices where you have 10 gigabit sessionizers and processors with deep packet management running. So you have to take that as an input in the front end, and you have to validate the data. This is most important also with crypt system. You have to validate the crypt system and actually map through the device. You have to map and equal the device. You have to get all the continuity of that device. So then you can attack that crypt system. And you have to do the same thing with data. It's the same thing with data. So when you do validation, then you do event recognition. You're going through looking for reliable events to allow you to assess what's going on in that data. Okay? And once you do that, then you want to put privacy protections in. This can be for everybody or anybody in the world. It wasn't restricted to U.S. citizens. We had an encryption process that scrambled all the data so it wasn't in the proper position. You have to ensure that so they couldn't force crib it. You get a false result. So, but that was built into that. We also had distributed storage and also indexed the content to all these transactions going on. And then you build the activity graph. This is where you put the relationships together and build the social networks. And you also, at the same time, if you have content, you keep it mapped to that graph and to the nodes in the graph. And then you take in other domains, from either other agencies or other kinds of information, input that into a central graph where you're really building the large profile of everybody in the world. Okay? So, and how you do that is now you get into the graph. This was the way we wanted to select data. And we proposed this for $250,000. We would do this for the NSA. We made this proposal to NSA. It's an unclassified proposal. We wanted to go through all of the collection and look at all the targets that you had known targets, and then look out 2 degrees as possibly associated with that activity, and look at latent semantic indexing of the data that's in common 2 degrees out within any data they're passing here to see if it's reliably matching, and therefore you then would start to say, well, this guy might be a new target, and we need to look closely at him and just make that decision at that point. But what the point of this 2 degree thing was to manage the volume of data. Right? The other 7 billion people are out here. We were throwing all that data away. Okay? That was not collected, stored anywhere. Okay, so that was just thrown away. And that was how we would protect everybody in the world. We would not have your data. Well, see, the NSA knew what I was all about, and they knew that was my perspective, so they didn't accept our $250,000 proposal. I mean, so they're now trying to do big data initiative for $250 million in the DoD every year, and a few hundred million in other agencies. Any rate, so that's the idea, and that's how we would select the data. And because you'd have to have relationships that made you close to something. We also had other algorithms we could look at in terms of the networking to see if there might be some suspicious network or community out there in the other network, but we didn't share that with NSA. So, because that's another thing they want to be able to do that. Okay, that's all the automated algorithms they want running. So, but we didn't do that, and all it would do was raise suspicion, meaning you had to look closer at it, not make them a target immediately. But they were talking about doing that with metadata, which meant they were talking about using this kind of material to use targeting to kill people. I mean, that's insane. At any rate, all that data is indexed to the graph, and this is basically the timeline. You take all the attributes that you're mapping in the community, pull them out, and all the index data that comes with it. So now you can build a timeline over time. This is the research we did on 9/11, all the terrorists and their activity during just before and up to 9/11, right here, September 2001. But this is the idea. You want these timelines, and then you want to look at the interactions in the community to see what kind of interaction profiles could you use to inference the intents and capabilities of these people? But this is done by the code on everybody input to the system. It's not done by people, it's done by the code. So, and also they want algorithms to go through these timelining process, through the timeline process on all the communities to figure out what we call profiles of interest of communities of interest and new profiles from other communities. So the idea was to do this. This was done so that people could look at it actually for the automated process. We would simply take it in list form and do the processing that way. I mean, we didn't have to see a picture of it, but this was done for people. That's how you commercially sell things, right? But we, of course, were raided and stopped, and so we aren't marketing this at all. Plus, they busted up our coalition to do it, so, and they made it impossible for us to get any work anywhere. So that's what our government has done to us, and what, in fact, they are able to do with everybody in the world. That's the real problem. Because this kind of knowledge centralized in what I call the central government, run by the Central Committee, true Soviet terms, okay? That's very dangerous because initially after 9/11, they made so many mistakes in the graph and tipping off things to the FBI. They said they got thousands of false tips. That's because they don't know what they're doing. Well, incompetence on this scale is exceedingly dangerous. It is. And I'm not sure that with the people in place right now, I really think they should all be taken into court and tried and given their chance to speak in court as to what they did and why. Yeah. Amen. So, but that's the technology, and there's a lot more to it. I've got a lot more slides. If you want copies, they're available here somewhere, and you're welcome to them. And also, I've got all those architectural framework diagrams showing how to automate at least the what to do and dependencies on the flow of that kind of information through an entire enterprise, no matter what the enterprise is. We were going to use it to do Medicare, Medicaid fraud. You could also use it for the stock market, for that kind of approach. So it's here, and if you are interested, I'm sure they'll be glad to get you copies. Thanks.